and all I see is Pizza Hut.
Yeah, I've been up for 12 hours, Bob. Sometimes I forget where I'm at.
Yeah, well, a double hitter.
That's why I could not be a Marine.
Okay. Well, the double header kind of wears you out, wears that arm out, doesn't it, Michael?
A little bit, a little bit.
Yeah,
It's okay, though.
You still got your fastball, though.
I do, and besides, it's not real work.
Yeah, okay. Probably a lot of fun for Tall Tales, right?
It is. No,
Yeah.
It's a great time.
All right. Okay, so here we are. So we are, I hope we're streaming Facebook Live now. And yeah, yes, we are. Okay. So everything is as it should be. And I'm going to go into this article that I picked from WAPO, the Washington Post, or the Washington Compost, as the case may be. The gun control debate explained in 5 questions, and the article purports to give both sides of the argument, the gun control and the Second Amendment position. And the Post kind of tips its hat to one or the other, and then I come in with a real definitive ruling telling you which argument is correct. So the first argument was, the first question was, would more guns prevent gun deaths? And the answer to that is yes, more guns would prevent gun deaths due to a phenomenon known as the good guy with the gun. And in many of these mass shootings, had there been a good guy with the gun, there would have been, maybe one person would have succumbed, and that would have been the bad guy with the gun. The second question was, do more gun laws prevent gun deaths? And the answer is no. And the other side, the gun control folks, came up with some really powerful numbers. But when you subtracted suicides out of those really powerful numbers, they weren't so powerful at all, to the point that even WAPO kind of agreed with my position, that more gun control laws don't prevent deaths. Here's the third one. Should schools arm teachers and guards? Pro-gun control. The Oregon Community College, where 9 recently died, wasn't a gun-free zone. Umpqua, U-M-P-Q-U-A, Umpqua community. Boy, how would you like to go to a school called Umpqua, Michael?
It sounds like Washington or something.
Umpqua Community College in Oregon.
Not close. Yeah.
Umpqua. Umpqua Community College allowed anyone with a conceal and carry permit to bring their guns inside, but for argument's sake, let's say teachers and other staff in America were suddenly armed. Even the pro-gun rights National Rifle Association back 2013 task force on this point found that there is no national training program and very few local ones to adequately ensure these guns are used safely. And by the way, the much maligned NRA, National Rifle Association, at one time was at the forefront of firearms training. That was kind of their raison d'etre at one time. Article goes on, training everyone would be a huge and expensive undertaking, and even then there's no guarantee that guns wouldn't be fired accidentally or in a moment of passion. A 2000 review by the Harvard Injury Control Research Center, for instance, found that guns in the home are more often used to threaten people the gun owner knows rather than to thwart crime. And we come back with pro-gun rights. Just quote Ben Carson, the retired neurosurgeon and top-tier GOP presidential candidate, said a few days after the Oregon shooting, "If the teacher was trained with a weapon, I'd be much more comfortable if they had one than if they didn't." Backing up that assumption are surveys cited by the National Association of School Resource Officers, which advocates for and trains school officers. The group made the case that armed guards have helped decrease school violence, citing a 2009 study that found the presence of school officers who are sometimes armed was attributable to nearly a 73% decrease in arrests involving possession of a weapon on school property. So the question here is a little bit flawed because the question is, first of all, it's hard to find.
That's why they call it the compost, Bob.
I guess so. Oh, yeah, here's the question. Should schools arm teachers and guards? Now, that's really two completely separate questions, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Should schools arm teachers and guards? And there's a quote in the Ben Carson part of the answer from school resource officers. We have school resource officers in our schools. And although it might be a difficult task to train every single teacher in every single school as to how to handle a firearm, training school resource officers shouldn't be that hard. So I'm going to rule here that, yes, school resource officers properly trained should be armed and that this would tend to reduce gun violence in schools. And I always come back to the same idiocy. You know, there are people who are so proud of their leftist orientation that they would advertise it and put things like on the front of their school in large type, "This is a gun-free school." Yeah, that's a really good invitation for anybody who wants to do bad stuff. So I'm going to rule that school resources officers ought to be properly trained and armed, and that this would tend to reduce gun violence in schools. As far as teachers are concerned, I think that there is something to be said for that. Not every teacher, not every school, and certainly proper training would be the foundation of any program that would arm teachers. So that's argument number 3. So tomorrow we'll come back to argument number 4, which is prohibiting gun ownership compatible with the Second Amendment? Now, that's going to be a really tough one. Yeah, I kind of tipped my hand on that one, I think. Okay, so next from there we go to Jimmy Ekotny. And today, Jimmy Klitzkie, you know, that's the time of the day when we play Meet the Press, our own local equivalent of Meet the Press. And I go through the editorials with a hawk eye, looking for mistakes in grammar, English usage, faulty reasoning, inappropriate statements of propositions, factual errors. And when I find them, I pounce upon them unmercifully. And in the process, I also evaluate each of those editorials against the very high standards of tall tales, which could be stated in one sentence: I gotta like it.
That helps.
Yeah.
The first pass.
Yeah, I gotta like it. And that means there has to be something there that I can sink my teeth into. It can't be just a feel-good writing saying something like, support Girl Scouts by buying their cookies. That is not really much of an editorial. Or sometimes the papers will use news stories and recast them as editorials. You know, like 7 dogs were run over by big trucks. Isn't that a pity? So it has to go beyond that. And I guess the easy way to describe what I'm looking for, I want something that I can sink my teeth into. And using that criteria, I will give one of the 2 editorials the coveted Blue Star, which is probably the Guam equivalent to the Pulitzer Prize for journalism.
And I see we do have a blue pen today.
We do. The good news is that I have replaced the blue pen that I'm blaming the real Joe Cruz for cobbing off
Well,
with.
you never see them in the same room together.
Yeah, the blue pen, and it's very true. So maybe Andrew could, I think Andrew did write something on that about the real Joe Cruz and the missing blue pen.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. That's going to go right down there with some of the great bank robberies of history, the theft of the blue pen.
Yeah, the blue pen heist of 2019.
Yeah, but anyhow, I have it. So I've got the Daily News editorial, such as it is, and I will just read some of the first sentence, and you could pretty well guess what the disposition of the Daily News editorial, so-called, is. It goes like this. One Monday morning last month, employees of Lake City came to work. Now, how interested are most of the members of our international radio listening audience? How interested do you think they are in a Monday morning where Lake City, Florida employees came to work?
Well, we do have Lake City, Guam, actually going on right now in Lower Tumon, thanks to the heavy rain.
Yeah, it's raining pretty hard. So I guess one of these days what I'm going to do is if the Daily News writes an editorial about Guam, on the odd chance that should happen, I might email it off to the Gannett paper in Lake City and say, could you please run this on your editorial page? So some of you guys in the Gannett empire would see what it's like when we turn to the editorial page of our newspaper and we find junk like this. What happened in Lake City? So you know the old saying, what goes down in Vegas stays in Vegas? Yeah. Well, what goes down in Lake City, Florida, no one gives a darn about.
And if you sent them an article about us, they wouldn't believe it anyway because they think we capsized.
Probably. Yeah, that's true. They would think it's some sort of an obituary or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so from there we go to the real newspaper. We've got Kevin Kerrigan in here in the morning doing the news, right?
Yes, sir.
He's always really got a good handle on the news. And I think he works for a newspaper somewhere, doesn't he, Michael?
I would say that he does, yes. A very prominent local newspaper.
Which paper is that?
That would be the Guam Daily Post, Bob.
It figures.
Yeah.
It figures, yeah. Okay, so here we go today with today's post. Guam's stray dog problem poses health and safety risks. Not exactly a dynamic title, but it's a pretty good editorial. I kind of like it. It goes like this. We don't need statistics to see the extent of Guam's pesky problem with stray dogs. Stray dogs are nearly everywhere on Guam, and most exist in packs. In villages, they go after walkers and school children who have to fend for themselves. Quote, children are susceptible to attacks that are very severe. This is a direct quote coming from an authority on dogs who has been recognized as, the website, as you were, the program veterinarian on Tall Tales.
Okay.
Yeah, the official veterinarian for Tall Tales. That would be Dr. Tom Poole. It's a good thing today is the real Joe Cruz's day off because he sometimes mangles the good doctor's last name.
Dr. Tom Poole.
He called him Dr. Tom Toole once upon a time. Yeah.
That was a book, wasn't it?
Tom Toole?
Yeah,
something like that. So Tom is the territorial veterinarian at the Department of Ag. He said last week he was called for a passage of legislation that would require mandatory neutering of female dogs. The stray dog population remains unabated, and the sheer number of dogs and their visibility show the strays have become emboldened to loiter in some of the busiest public places. They no longer confine themselves to mostly boony areas, and that's a major public health and safety concern. Along Hotel Row in Tumon Bay, packs of stray dogs have been seen along the main strip, Palisan Vitoris Road. Some of these dogs are covered in mange and hang out next to some of the hotels with, quote, resort attached to their names. All it takes is one headline that a dog has viciously attacked someone in Tuan Bay, and there go many of the efforts to make Guam look good to international travelers. The greatest worry, though, is the public safety and health of our residents. Outside of stores, residents, and student bus stops and commercial buildings, stray dogs congregate, no longer showing any fear of being spotted by humans. I got to stop here and say, I think maybe we're working at cross purposes with ourselves. Dr. Tom Poole says we ought to spay all the female dogs so that they can't reproduce. And that way we could cut down on our stray dog population. So the thrust of this editorial is we should cut down on the stray dog population. But at the same time, it seems to me that the government, more particularly the Guam Water Works Authority, is working at cross purposes to that aim. There is a story in today's Daily News that the Waterworks has let a contract to install 78 fire hydrants at a cost of $1.3 million. That's in today's Post.
Wow.
So we say we're trying to cut down on stray dog populations, and then we're installing 78 new fire hydrants. I guess to make the dogs more comfortable, huh?
Could be.
we can't keep the restrooms in the parks clean, but by gosh, we're going to install 78 new fire hydrants for the stray dogs. So sometimes you got to wonder, maybe the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, right, Michael?
I think you're exactly right.
In a discussion last week about the proposed requirement for neutering female dogs, it was brought up that if rabies is introduced into Guam's dog population, we'd be in for a really serious health scare. Various health concerns were sounded out many years ago, including at a legislative hearing in 2010. In that hearing, a local veterinarian, Lisa Silk, who's pretty smooth, by the way, Michael.
That's what I hear.
Yeah. She said these animals are carrying and spreading diseases such as Giardia, Coccidia, hookworms, tick disease, mange, all of which are potentially contagious to humans, not to mention the diseases that are contagious to other animals such as parvovirus and heartworms. These were concerns then, and even more so now. And with our stray dog population estimated to number as many as 60,000, the annual stray dog roundup catches only 1,000. That's less than 2% of the total estimated stray dog population. This is an issue that lawmakers and executive branch officials should be prioritizing as part of their promises to make public health and safety among the top 3 priorities alongside education. I wonder how many dogs you could catch for $400,000 that we're going to use to send 100 folks to Festpac in Honolulu. That's probably a lot of dogs. Clearly, solutions in providing resources to solve this problem have not been adequate. Poole and the Commissioner, Mayor of, as you were, Jigo, are appealing for legislation that would require the neutering of female dogs. The inadequately staffed Department of Agriculture also should get additional funding and manpower to round up strays in tandem with a stepped-up stray dog neutering campaign. Poole's office isn't only understaffed, it doesn't even have a government-issued phone to handle calls.
Wow.
Yeah. Boy, but somehow Tom manages to get on the line and call tall tales from time to time.
Right. Yeah.
He's a guy who really knows his priorities. The problem needs to be prioritized by those who make the top-level decisions on funding and hiring staff to beef up the resources of the local agriculture department. The solution rests ultimately in the governor's and senators' hands. Yeah, I think talking about senators' hands, I think I heard you and Ray, maybe it was this morning, talking about senators standing out there, on the road with signs on their hands saying enough.
Enough, yeah. Yeah, they didn't understand they were supposed to see the message and not give it.
Yeah. But, I mean, they did the right thing. This was a chance for them to get out there and virtue signal, to make themselves visible, perhaps get some earned media out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they could always wash their hands later on.
That's it. Nothing like a smile and a wave.
That's
Makes things
it.
better.
So the editorial makes the point then that this is a problem then for the governor and for senators. The solution rests ultimately in the governor's and senators' hands. Efforts to curb the problem have not been given adequate resources for years and years. And the punchline, it's nearly decade-old legislative testimony, and those words are still ringing true today. I was talking about Dr. Selk's testimony. Well, this is an example of a good editorial. It takes a subject that doesn't have a whole lot of pizzazz on first glance, You could say this editorial was kind of a dog.
Woof.
But in the hands of a skillful writer, it made a good point, and a point that we should all pay attention to. It stated the problem. It was factually accurate. It was readable, well written. It put the finger on people who should be pointed out as not having done what they were supposed to do. It had a good punchline, and perhaps most of all, I liked it. So once again, no competition for the Post. So the Post is the first blue star from the new blue pen here at Tall Tales. And I'll probably be able to keep this pen for quite a while, because the real Joe won't be back, I think, until about the 8th of August. So I'll be able to hang on to this until then anyhow. Okay, so here we are, first break already. So come back from the break, I'm going to go into the card.
Get 2 Pepsi 12 packs for only $8.99 when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See stores for details. Circle K. Take it easy. Get a Pepsi 12 pack for only $3.49 when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See store for details. Circle K. Take it easy. Get 2 Coke 12 packs for only $8.99 when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See stores for details. Circle K. Take it easy.
The summer of Jeep, Compass, Cherokee, Wrangler, Cars Plus, and Mighty. Your new adventure starts now. Buy the 2019 Motor Trend SUV of the year and get a new Jeep Wrangler Sport for $268 per paycheck. Or get a new Jeep Compass Sport, only $167 per paycheck. Let them hear you coming in the new 2019 Jeep Cherokee. Buy for $205 per paycheck. And get financing as low as 1.99% on all Jeep models. Come see why you'll be kicking it at Cars Plus in Mighty. Driven by you.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro, inviting you to try their Kahlua pork and cabbage, featuring slow-roasted smoke-laced pork, shredded and sautéed with onions and cabbage, served with steamed rice and lumi-lumi salmon. Try it today. Available in Hagåtña and in Tumon at the Grand Plaza Hotel. For reservations, please call 969-2652.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So we move from Demi Cotney straight into the card. And I have a short card today, a very short card. I start out with O'Reilly versus racism, which I see as necessary to kind of establish some ground rules for the rest of the card. And then the second and only other item on the card is called Davis versus the status quo. And we're going to give Dave a call a little later on. Let him take a victory lap after I kind of set the stage for it. But I'm going to start out with Bill O'Reilly. And this is what Bill O'Reilly said: to understand the current racist label in politics, you must uncover the overriding current philosophy on the far left. And we talked a little bit about the far left yesterday, and the four things that the far left is attempting to accomplish, and to a large degree has already accomplished. This is the current philosophy on the far left. It comes down to this: the United States has always been a patriarchy run by evil, corrupt white guys who delight in delivering pain to everyone else. That's the far left. That's kind of their credo. And then you put Donald Trump's picture next to that definition. The radical left is so extreme on this that even socialist bomb thrower Bernie Sanders is now being shunned by some of his fellow travelers. Old white guys do not have it going on in 2019. Boy, that's a tough one for me, huh?
Yeah, well, hey, I'm not getting younger.
Yeah. Well, you got a ways to go, Michael.
I know I do.
Yeah. The radical, as you were recently, a tape was uncovered where Congressman Ilhan Omar from Illinois warned Americans that white men are the primary cause of violence in the USA, and we had better watch them. Similar, quote, white guys are malignant, close quote, stuff appears in media nearly every day, with a subliminal message being women and minorities should be running the country. Yeah, well, we're already there, aren't we, Michael? Women are running our country, running Guam. In case you haven't heard out there in our international radio listening audience, Lilian Guerrero is the first female governor of Guam, and 10 of the 15 members of our legislature are females.
Yeah.
Now, you'd have to have been living under a rock for about the first 6 weeks after the election to have missed that one, because people didn't say good morning or good afternoon. They said, we've got a female governor. We've got 10 women in the legislature. Now, as far as Guam is concerned, who is and who isn't a minority? That's a little bit harder to deal with, isn't it?
It really is, no.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, we are the minority here.
Yeah, well, the last I checked, the fourth most numerous group of folks here on island, if you wanted to gauge them by ethnicity, race, color, something like that, are white folks. Running a close fourth to third, which is folks from the freely associated states. I think there are 18,000 of them. There are maybe 10,000 white folks, or something like that. And then next above that are Filipinos, and then Chamorros are the majority. But I suppose if you looked at national trends or the national averages, Chamorros are the minority as far as the entire country is concerned.
Yes.
I can tell you how much time I spend on figuring out what my rights are as far as being a member of the minority, if I am. I could give you an estimate of how much time that would take, but I don't have a calculator sophisticated enough to divide a second into smaller parts.
True.
And that's what I need. Okay, back to the editorial. Of course, the aforementioned Donald Trump is the template for anti-white male sentiment. For more than 3 years, the president has been ruthlessly attacked by many left-wing women and minorities. But if Mr. Trump counterattacks, he's branded as a racist and misogynist. So he can't defend himself without bringing on further attacks. It doesn't help that the president often personalizes his verbal missiles, as the recent, quote, "go back to where you came from," controversy clearly demonstrates. The personal attacks by the president often obscure his valid points, thereby giving his opponents cover and momentum. The Elijah Cummings trust up, as you were dust up, illustrates this point. Congressman Cummings, head of the House Oversight Committee, is doing everything he can to wreck Trump's presidency. No question about that. So the president is angry with Cummings and tweeted that he has not improved bad conditions in his own district. And one thing that this article doesn't touch on is Cummings using his seat on that oversight committee to scold the director of Homeland Security. There was nothing in what Cummings did except a scolding. Nothing that he did would help to improve the situation, would lay the foundation for legislation or anything else. He just had the opportunity to scold, and he took it. And after that, Fox ran some video of street scenes in Baltimore, and it was pretty grim. So with that little background here, we go back into the editorial, and so the president is angry with Cummings and tweeted that he has not improved bad conditions in his own district. Then Trump gets personal and calls that area of Baltimore rat and roach infested. Presto, Trump's a racist. Again, the president should have remembered the firestorm of his, I use the word shucks here, the shucks whole countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a word that begins with the same two letters that we don't use on the air.
I'm just curious what race rats and roaches are.
I think it probably is one of those things that's in the eye of the beholder.
I think so, yeah. Clearly.
Okay, so then O'Reilly goes on to say, when you denigrate places where people reside, those folks are going to be offended. And since many blacks live in Baltimore, the reoccurring drumbeat strikes up. Trump's a racist, an evil white man. It doesn't matter that Elijah Cummings and everyone in Baltimore knows his district is in tough shape. The media will not allow non-minorities to state that. Repeating for emphasis. The media will not allow non-minorities to state that. In America today, speech that criticizes people of color is racist speech, no matter what.
Well, I would agree with that if you say, hey, that black person, blah, blah, blah. Then, yes, you may be being, or if you say all black people are blah, 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 then certainly that's racist. But that's just silly, that notion there, just because a lot of people of color live there and you criticize the area that you're criticizing that particular race.
Yeah. Well, I remember once upon a time when we used to use the term race prejudice. Mm-hmm. But the word prejudice has gone away somehow. And what race prejudice was, which as I can recall was pretty universally condemned, was prejudging a person based on his race. Well, he's a this, that, or the other. He's a white man, therefore he's cruel and inconsiderate.
Right.
We weren't supposed to do that. But back in those days, we placed a lot more value on individual rights, and we weren't anywhere near as far into the phenomenon of identity politics as we are right now.
Well, and not only that, but back then people didn't get offended quite as easily.
Well, the new rules, if you're on the left and you have an argument or a discussion with someone on the right, it's not enough to just disagree with that person's argument. You must let him know that you must let them know. You must let them know that you are offended by their argument.
Deeply offended.
Deeply offended.
Egregiously.
Yeah. So, where was I here? The majority of Americans have not bought into the, quote, white men are evil campaign, but the committed left media surely has. Therefore, the political landscape now favors non-white men, at least in the Democrat Party precincts, and that's something of which Joe Biden should be acutely aware. He's an old white man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Probably too old to get a job as a talk show host.
And, yeah.
Probably not sharp enough either.
Best one I've seen lately.
Yeah. Okay, so this is back to Joe again. With the hugging attacks and the Kamala Harris busing thing, white guy Joe has taken 2 to the head. One more and there could be a knockout. Another white guy bites the dust. So the real point here is that in America today, speech that criticizes, quote, people of color is racist speech, no matter what. No matter what the person of color has done or has not done. If a person who is not a person of color, well, even a person of color, even a person of color criticizing a white person of color for misconduct could be accused of racism.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I just thought I would get that into the record here before we go to Dave Davis. I think before I go into the case, and I'm going to start out with the Treaty of Paris and take this all the way up to the Ninth Circuit yesterday. So everything you ever wanted to know about our so-called political status plebiscite but didn't know where to look, you're going to get the answers now. But before I do that, Dave's been probably staying up late just to call us here or for us to call him. So I think I'll give Dave a chance to take a victory lap. Okay, so we're waiting for the phone to ring here. So Michael Knight is on the phone attempting to call Dave Davis, the plaintiff in Arnold Davis versus Guam Election Commission, Alice Tyron, Martha Ruth, Joseph Mesa, Johnny Titano, Joshua Tenorio, Donald Weekly, and Leonardo Rapadas. No luck, Michael? Okay. Good afternoon, Dave.
Howdy, Bob. A little
So,
more than afternoon to me, but that's okay.
well, I appreciate your staying up late to participate here with our international radio listening audience. And
I'm always up.
as I mentioned to Michael, I thought I'd give you a chance to take a victory lap before we plunge into the particulars of Davis versus Guam Election Commission. So what do you want to tell us, Dave?
Oh, no victory lap here. I'm just kind of disappointed. It took 8 years to get here, that's all.
Well, there's an old saying that the wheels of justice grind slowly but exceedingly fine.
Extremely fine, exceedingly fine. You're absolutely right. And but you can't blame it all on the judicial system, you know. It's, I think about 90% of that can be attributed to an obstinate Guam.
Well, one of the reasons we have a court system is that people don't always do the right thing just because it's the right thing. Sometimes they require some judicial coercion, and perhaps that's the case in Davis versus Election Commission.
Well, I do believe that we did the right thing. Not everyone agrees, but I was asked today by one of your colleagues there that what my feeling was about this opinion, and I wanted to know if I felt vindicated or some kind of euphoric reaction to it. And I said, no, I just feel a sense of satisfaction. That's about the best way I can describe it.
I heard your chat with Ray, excuse me, with Ray this morning, Dave. Ray asked you about damages, compensation, and you said that you never went into this with the idea of any personal benefit. So taking that into consideration and at least the psychic energy that you put into this, I'm going to have to chalk this victory up for you doing the right thing for the right reason. It's a matter of principle, right?
I believe so, yes. That was always been my take on it. I've invested about 30 years of my life in this issue.
Yeah, well, it came out to a pretty good outcome, I think, for all of us. And the title of this item on my card here is Davis versus the Status Quo. And what I'm going to do when we finish with your victory lap, I'm going to explain why what you did is of great benefit to everyone, regardless of, I should say, his or her opinion concerning the political status of Guam. But nowadays I have to say their opinion because it clears the cobwebs and causes people to actually think about what they're doing as opposed to just repeating the same old moves over and over again.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. In fact, I think it might have. This is a landmark case, in my opinion, and it could have effects beyond Guam at some point.
Well, you can bet that anyone who goes to court in American Samoa or, well, I guess just American Samoa or the Northern Marianas with a similar theory would be looking your case straight in the eye.
Yeah, I doubt if anybody's going to do that in American Samoa because they're pretty happy with what they have now. They've had their own constitution for like 60 years now or something like that, and they're very happy with the relationship they have with the United States of America, even though they're not citizens.
And ironically, when Neil Weir's gang brought suit trying to achieve a birthright citizenship for people in Samoa like we have here, the government of American Samoa opposed it. They said, we don't want no stinking American citizenship.
That's what I was getting at, yeah. Yeah, they're happy.
Yeah.
The way it is.
Well, I think...
What is this Davis versus the status quo thing here? I don't quite catch on to that. What's that?
Well, that's part of the unpacking. That I said I was going to let you take your victory lap first because I know that you're staying up late here just to have this chat with us, but that's part of the reasoning that all of our international radio listening audience is expecting whenever an important case comes down. And the status quo right now is this: posturing. There's a small vocal group of people who are posturing. What they really want is independence, but they don't want to come out and admit that that's what they want. They would rather continue on with the government of Guam's nickel, posturing and attempting to build support in the process. Well, you've kind of burst that balloon for them.
Not building it very fast. I think they've kind of hit a plateau, frankly. There was some interest, obviously. They got some converts there, but I don't believe that the independentista movement is going to come to anything great down the line. There are lots of options here. This really opens up a whole new vista for what I would hope to be some enlightened lawmakers in Guam, and depends, I guess, on how much pressure they get from the radical elements. But I think this is an opportunity that we should not miss.
Absolutely. And I've made the point over and over again that the United States Congress, because Guam is an unincorporated territory, which in some respects is a very, very favorable place to be the United States Congress has more ability to give us some of the things we really want than it could with a state. But you got to get.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I was asked today what I think Gov Guam should do now. And what I said, or what I wrote to my respondent there, was that I think we should rewind to just before the 1997 Guam Commonwealth hearings in Hawaii, and start over and pull out the Guam Commonwealth Act and eviscerate the things that were so stuck in the craw of the U.S. Congress and the U.S. administration at the time. Get those out of the act and tweak the act to Guam's advantage, which I'm sure we could do in many ways. We could get some concessions there, and without running afoul of the constitutional and other protections, and resubmit it to Congress. And I think you're right. I think they would be receptive, and I think we could go with a good Commonwealth Act.
Well, especially now that we have a representative in Washington who doesn't come in and ask everyone, please feel sorry for me. Please feel sorry for me because of all the bad things you've done to me in the past. Our current congressman takes the approach that Guam is good for the United States and will continue to be good and perhaps can be even better as time goes on.
As long as we continue and he continues to recognize and acknowledge that the United States is good for Guam.
Exactly.
Two-way street.
You're exactly right, Dave. Dave, I'm listening to the plaintiff strains of Dave Brubeck's Take 5 in the background. So I'm going to have to break it off, but I really thank you for staying up and talking with us, and I hope you enjoyed your victory lap here on Tall Tales.
Anytime, Bob. Just give me a call whenever you want to talk about something. Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay, we'll do it. Thanks again, Dave.
We know too well the inconvenience of not having power after a storm. You worry about the food in the freezer going bad. Nights get hot. It's hard finding comfort when going to sleep. These are realities. But with solar and battery storage from Micronesia Renewable Energy, these realities can be a thing of the past. The solar works during the day and the batteries power your home at night. Call 632-2613 to see how solar plus battery storage can make life a little more convenient. MRE, the smarter choice.
Hey, welcome to this Subway ad for the new club collection. How do you want it?
I'll take a book club.
Absolutely.
So, last week we sunk our teeth into Subway's meaty new release, the Steak Club.
I didn't finish it yet.
Not again, Sandra. This week, it's the new Southwest Chicken Club, also by Subway. No spoilers, but there's a tasty twist.
Jalapeno cheddar bread and guacamole?
Sandra, get out. Subway, make it what you want.
Good ending.
Limited time only at participating restaurants.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Okay, I just got just a couple minutes here before that big halftime show that we have every day at 1700, 5 o'clock, with the marching band, the cheerleaders, the synchronized card section in the grandstand, the tumblers, the acrobats, fire eaters, and at the very end, that barrage of cannon fire that causes Michael to have to take his headset off because it's so vibrational. Not his headset, but the cannon fire. So,
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, you're welcome, Michael. So when we come back, I'll be into the Dave Davis versus Guam Election Commission case. the so-called plebiscite case, and I'll start out with the Treaty of Paris and take it all the way up to the present, answering every possible question that you could have, and of course stopping my interminable spiel every time you want to get in and put your points in. So I suspect that there are a couple of folks out there that can't wait to jump on and make their particular statement. So that's good. That's what talk radio is all about. So we're going to break for that big halftime show now. I'll see you in 6 or 7 minutes.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Learning more about the victims, I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. The names of the 3 people fatally shot Sunday at the Garlic Festival in Northern California revealed. 6-year-old Stephen Romero and 13-year-old Kayla Salazar were from San Jose. 25-year-old Trevor Irby was from upstate New York. Police still don't have a clear motive, though, for the shooting by 19-year-old Santino Lagan, an American of Italian and Iranian descent.
He bought the weapon he used, an AK-47 type rifle, in the words of the police chief, legally in Nevada on July 9th. As for motives, investigators going through his social media profile and posts apparently made in the last few days. In one, he mentions a book that promotes white supremacy, and he is critical of people of mixed race. But he also rails in vulgar terms against white people from Silicon Valley. Police say they are doing all they can to find out what drove him.
Fox's Jonathan Hunt. 2 American teenagers are being held in Rome. Italian police say they confessed to killing a police officer.
19-year-old Finnegan Lee Elder said he stabbed Cercialarega in self-defense because he thought he was being strangled, according to a judge's report Monday. But apparently no marks were found on Elder's neck. A leaked image of the other suspect, 18-year-old Gabrielle Christian Natale Yorth, handcuffed and blindfolded in police custody, has caused a stir in Italy, with people fearing this could complicate the quest for justice.
Fox's Amy Kellogg. And the alleged hacker of Capital One is reportedly a former Amazon employee. The New York Times reports Paige Thompson from the Seattle area previously worked for Amazon Web Services. Capital One says the hacker got more than 100 million people's information. This is Fox News.
Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro brings you island hospitality with a true taste of modern Chamorro cuisine. A bistro look that feels like home. Their menu features local and traditional flavors with a twist. From their famous Calaguan Hafa to fresh ahi poke salad and their award-winning barbecue ribs. Mescla takes your favorite local dishes and serves them with extra flair that you'll only find at Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Stop by their newest location in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon. For reservations, call 969-2652. Mescla, a true taste of Guam.
65 years ago, Bank Pacific opened its doors to our community. As we celebrate, we offer you a special 65th anniversary personal loan rate for as low as 4.65% for travel, back to school, a wedding. Do whatever you want with the money. During July, we just want to give it to you for as low as 4.65% APR. It's our birthday present to you.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal opportunity lender, member FDIC, conditions apply.
A big staffing shakeup of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. 5 top staffers left their jobs Monday following a couple of stories by Politico revealing unhappiness over the lack of diversity.
The executive director of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee handing in her resignation. Allison Jaslow quitting the House Democrats' campaign arm over complaints about lack of diversity in its upper ranks. Two Hispanic lawmakers tonight say the DCCC is in complete chaos.
Fox's Mike Emanuel. Politico reported last week the top lawmakers in the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus were angry with Representative Sherry Bustos of Illinois for excluding minorities from her staff and failing to live up to her campaign promises. All this just before the Democrats' presidential debates in Detroit tonight and Wednesday.
The second debate from Detroit is again broken up over 2 nights, 10 candidates apiece. Tonight's lineup includes Montana Governor Steve Bullock, a Democrat elected in a state very favorable to President Trump. Bullock failed to qualify for the opening debate last month. Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren also share the stage tonight. Frontrunner Joe Biden will wait until tomorrow night, so will California Senator Kamala Harris, who took direct aim at the former vice president's record on race relations on the debate stage a month ago. Jared Halpern, Fox News.
On Capitol Hill today, the Senate Armed Services Committee will grill the nominee to become the next vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A former aide of Air Force General John Hyten accuses him of sexual misconduct. The committee hearing will be public. And stocks finished mixed on Monday. The Dow up nearly 29 points because the Fed's expected interest rate cut is already priced in. The Nasdaq dropped 36. This is Fox News.
We understand what matters to you because at Docomo Pacific, we're a family too. With the Now Family program, mom, dad, and kids stay connected on the latest devices the whole family can enjoy. For just $155 a month, get 3 lines with 30 gigs of 4G LTE data each, and endless use of your favorite apps without affecting your monthly data bucket. Add more, get more, save more. Docomo Pacific, better together. Some conditions apply.
We know too well the inconvenience of not having power after a storm. You worry about food in the freezer going bad. Nights get hot. It's hard finding comfort when going to sleep. These are realities. But with solar and battery storage from Micronesia Renewable Energy, these realities can be a thing of the past. The solar works during the day and the batteries power your home at night. Call 632-2613 to see how solar plus battery storage can make life a little more convenient. MRE, the smarter choice.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So here we are, back again, Tall Tales, and we've finished that big halftime show that everyone has come to grown to love and appreciate. Michael Knight is enjoying it immensely in the control room. I don't know if you're able to partake of that halftime show when you're not working, Michael. Maybe you're taking a nap.
Yeah, when I'm not working, usually about this time I'm making dinner, dealing with the cat. They're pretty needy.
Yeah.
So, things like that. So
you must be really appreciating this.
Really, I do. Well, and plus these headphones I'm wearing, as you can see, they're sports headphones, so I get to hear it in surround sound.
Okay, very good. All right, so we're embarking on the second half of Tall Tales, and I'm going to talk about item on the card, which is Davis versus the status quo. And as usual, the poet laureate of Tall Tales, Andrew, has chimed in with a limerick that's pretty cool. And Andrew has written it from the standpoint of the nationalist, the independentista, as it were. And here's how it goes. There once was a Davis named Dave, whose voting rights whose voting rights, as you were, whose voting right courts have now saved. The wackos are whining, kvetching and opining. When will we stop being slaves?
Ooh, that's pretty good.
That's the. You don't get to be the poet laureate of Tall Tales because you know a couple nursery rhymes.
Right, that's it, evidently.
Yeah, it's a little bit past the roses are red, violets are blue type of.
A little deeper.
Yeah, and that's Andrew. He comes up with some really good ones, but I think that's pretty apropos because I've heard people over there on that side, on the nationalist side, saying we aren't really free. You know, we weren't really liberated on Liberation Day because we're still not free. And I suppose it depends on what kind of a definition you attach to freedom, but I think that those who think that we're not free might do themselves a favor by going to a country where freedom is not taken for granted. They might have a little bit more appreciation of living here in a democracy with a rule of law, a Republican government, etc. And of course, this guy who sits over here in the lazy boy, the guy who always has the right answer and knows everything, says, yeah, but we can't vote. And he said, we can't vote for president. We can't vote for for a senator. We're second-class citizens. And, of course, we're not second-class citizens. We're, if there are any second-class citizens on Guam, it were those of us who were not native inhabitants as per the local legislation, and had there been a plebiscite, we couldn't have voted. That would have been a good identification of second-class citizens, but thanks to Dave's case, that's no longer a consideration. But on the idea of voting, voting in the United States is not a civil right. Your civil rights are the protections found in the Bill of Rights. Voting in the United States is a political right. Political rights in the United States, civil rights are primarily a function of national citizenship. Civil rights are primarily voting rights are primarily a function of state citizenship. So folks who live in the District of Columbia don't have representation in Congress. Does that mean that people who live in the District of Columbia aren't really free?
Or second-class citizens.
Or are second-class citizens. And ironically, the rallying cry in D.C. is they'd like to have the same deal that we have. And that is, we don't have representation in Congress, but we got to pay U.S. income tax. And those lucky dudes out in Guam and the Virgin Islands don't have to pay U.S. income tax.
That's true.
Much better deal than theirs. So the Davis case, the card item is Davis versus the status quo. And all of you out there who are bemoaning the Davis case, or as Andrew said, kvetching about it, Davis did you a tremendous favor because he's shown you which road you cannot go down. So if you really want an independent Guam, you can't continue to do what you've been doing with any success. And what you've been doing is this, and I've made this point over and over again. You can't, it takes a real stretch of imagination to think that you could use, and by the way, I forgot the vocabulary lesson here that we really need when we start these things. There are certain terms that have to be understood. The first is chamocracy, which is government of Chamorros, by Chamorros, for Chamorros, chamocracy. The second one is Gwexit, or Guam exit, Guam exiting its relationship with the United States. Quisling is a name that goes all the way back to World War II, which was assigned to a Norwegian collaborator, a guy who wanted to be Prime Minister of Norway so bad that he collaborated with the invading Nazis to become Prime Minister of Norway. It's a name that's fairly well understood in American politics. And then we've got C cubed. Anytime you're speaking about these matters, you should use the 3 C's at least in every sentence: Chamorro, colonialization, and culture, especially if you want to run for office.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a one from the French, and maybe Pierre can help us with this, Pieds Noirs. The Pieds Noirs were the 1 million French settlers in Algeria, many of whom had been there for generations, who had to leave Algeria when Algeria became independent, when Algeria was decolonized. Mm-hmm. So with all this talk about an independent Guam from a certain small but very vocal group, I haven't heard anyone say what the disposition of our Pieds Noirs would be. Would we be shown, would be given taxi fare to the airport and receive the fond goodbyes of everybody, or
like the Beverly Hillbillies wave?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and would those of us who were Pieds Noirs, would we be entitled, would we be full-fledged members of the citizenry of an independent Guam, or would it be a chamocracy? And until somebody starts talking about these things, I don't have to even think about an independent Guam. I'm against it. I don't even need to engage any thought process. Like everybody else, I'm going to look after my own self-interest. And I don't see my self-interest as being furthered at all in light of what I was just talking about here, chamocracy, Pieds Noirs, etc. The next item on the list is the Chamorro Socialist Republic of Guam, the CSRG, which, as far as I can tell, is what the Michael Bavaquaites, that brand of independence, is really looking for. No one has said anything about what an independent Guam would look like. But my suspicion is that it would be an Antonio Gramsci-influenced Chamorro Socialist Republic of Guam. And then I've got Chamorro Independence Commission. Its official name is the Decolonization Commission, but it isn't, it wasn't, and it never will be. It's only about Chamorros, and it's only about Chamorro independence. The claim is, well, you know, the goal of the commission is to help people choose, not people, to help Chamorros choose between independence, free association, and statehood. Well, free association is a legal impossibility. The United States is not going to be able to negotiate with itself. So in order for anything like free association to take place, whoever it is that the U.S. is going to associate with would have to become independent. So there you are. It's a will of the wisp. If we only have 170,000 people here compared to, say, Wyoming, 600,000, the chances of anyone seriously considering Guam for statehood somewhere between slim and none. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I see a 0% chance.
And the reason is not who we are or what we are, it's where we are, and especially how many of us there are. If all of a sudden Guam had 600,000 folks, Guam and the CNMI combined, then we got a shot at it. Other than that, no. And the final word in vocabulary is irredentism. Irredentism is any political or popular movement that seeks to claim or reclaim and occupy a land that the movement's members consider to be a lost or unredeemed territory from their nation's past. So that's a word that came from Mussolini's Italy, Italia irredenta. And although the local vocal minority hasn't used the term, that's basically what we're talking about, is Chamorro Irredenta, to reclaim those lost lands being primarily the island of Guam. So getting back into Davis versus the status quo, what we have right now is the Chamorro, as you were, the Chamorro Independence Commission, which is not only dominated, it is complete, a Chamorro independence movement supported by taxpayers' funds, yours and mine, and populated primarily with quislings, people who are so down on the colonizer that they work for the colonizer's government. And the idea is to use those favorable positions to build support for something which most people really don't care for, which is independence. So instead of coming out and saying, yeah, we want Guam to be independent, and petitioning Congress to grant independence to Guam, we go this Chamorro self-determination route, which at best is confusing. So I got A. Carl on the line. Is it A. Carl or R. Carl?
It is our Carl.
Our very own Carl. Good afternoon, Carl.
Hi, good afternoon, Bob. I agree 100% with what you said. I think the primary thing that sticks in the craw of a small group of highly vocal leadership in this movement, and I'm confining it to the small core leadership, is that they're not in charge. We've got personal freedom, and that is outside of our souls. That's the most important thing we have. What they want is sovereignty. But unfortunately, after independence is gotten, and it was proved many times in Africa, sovereignty has resulted in just a huge mess. And it's happened many other places. I've got a question for you. I'd just like to find out your take. Why is it that Puerto Rico has had such difficulty with the statehood issue? I mean, they're close, compared to where we are. They've got over 3 million people. It seemed like they'd be in an almost ideal situation. I know the Congress likes to bring in two entities at the same time, as I think you've mentioned, one leaning Republican, one leaning Democrat. But I've always been puzzled. You know, they've been scratching at that for years, that statehood issue, and I'm just wondering, what is the primary thing that has kept Puerto Rico from becoming a state?
Well, Carl, of course, you know what the answer to that is, don't you? Racism.
Racism.
Whenever things don't go the way you want them to, the answer is always the same: racism.
Which is funny because there are more Puerto Ricans in New York City than there are in all of Puerto Rico.
I know. But, if Puerto Rico were a state, it would have 2 senators and at least 4 members of the House of Representatives. And they'd all be Democrats. And it takes both houses of Congress to admit a new state. So given that situation, if for no other reason, I think it's going to be very difficult for Puerto Rico to crack that nut and become a state, assuming that that's the universal desire of the people. And, of course, they have their own battles there, too. You know, the last time around, one of the groups caused a boycott of the election. So although statehood got the most votes, a lot of the people sat the election out. It's a very contentious issue in Puerto Rico. But one of the things that kind of simplifies the Puerto Rico situation, there are no indigenous folks in Puerto Rico because the Spanish killed them all.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. Well, it probably takes the wind out of some folks' sails. But anyhow, that's my answer, Carl.
Okay, I was just curious. They seem to be in a much more ideal situation. I knew there were some things that were in the way, but I was just curious why. They've been at that for basically decades. That question has been batted around. And if they have that many problems, it just really puts, I think, our situation in perspective. That really the best thing we need to do is build on what's gotten us this far and gotten us to a pretty remarkable state of development and stability.
And individual rights and freedom.
Yeah, I think that's primary. Those personal freedoms are priceless. There are people sacrificing everything, risking everything they have to come to the United States so they can live free.
Yeah, well, you just go down to the border at Tijuana and you'll see those huge fences that the United States has built to keep people from escaping to Mexico. Yeah. Thanks for calling, Carl.
All right.
And let's see here. I got Marcus and I got Andre. So, Marcus, we're close here to the 7th inning stretch, but take a shot.
Okay, cool. Yes, sir. Enjoyed your soliloquy on statehood status, and that was very informative. And it definitely points that the current direction we're going is a waste of our money and time because it's futile. And that the one thing I did have a question about is your last term there, which was not irritability, but
irridenta.
Irridenta.
Mm-hmm.
And what if to me, I don't know what's wrong with the status quo, but there's a few things, but it seems like we got the best world of it. But irridenta, tribalism and Native Americanism. So you become a reservation or a nation of Chamorros in the United States of America. And like other reservations in the United States of America, you're able to form a government in cooperation and treaties with the United States.
Well, except that Guam, the folks on Guam, no matter what, could never be Indians. And that's what the term that
Right, but the ANA has described us as Native American.
Let me continue here. The politically incorrect United States Constitution doesn't even use the words Native American.
Oh.
Yeah, therefore you might as well toss it in the shucks can, right?
Okay.
But Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution says that let's see here.
Oh, yeah, to have it right.
Yeah, here it is. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes.
Mm-hmm.
So every Indian tribe that there ever was one is in existence in 1789 when the Constitution was ratified. There aren't going to be any new Indian tribes. Now, it might
been around since that time.
It might very well be that a tribe that was in existence then could be discovered or recognized, but it's got to trace its roots back to 1789. So even if we could, that would be the worst possible thing because Indians, Native Americans, who are in tribes living on reservations have a guardian and ward relationship with the United States.
Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah, and the Department of Interior.
Well, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but the United States has the guardian relationship with the Indians. And if we're all that concerned about sovereignty, that would be the last thing that we should be striving for, right?
Right. Yeah.
So irridenta goes back to Mussolini, and Mussolini took over Italy in 1922.
Yes.
And he was a nationalist, and he wanted to reestablish the Roman Empire. And that's why the definition of irridenta means a popular movement whose members strive to reclaim lost or unredeemed territory from their nation's past. So you listen to today's independentistas, they're going to say, you know, we never had a chance to determine our political status. Therefore, we should turn the clock all the way back to when the Magellan first came here and start there, right?
But that statement's not even true because we did vote on it in the 70s or something, and maybe even before then, right?
Well, we haven't had a quote plebiscite, close quote, but we have had a couple of things happen in 1936. A couple of very prominent citizens of Guam went to Washington, B.J. Berdallo and F.B. Leon Guerrero, to petition Congress to grant the people citizenship. And then, of course, we had the Guam Congress, and they're working to establish an Organic Act and citizenship and the so-called walkout, et cetera. So if those weren't matters of self-determination, then we ought to do what the lefties are doing in the United States and go around and find statues to all these people and tear them down because they were collaborating with the United States instead of standing for independence for Guam.
I mean, to me, current status is pretty beneficial in our regard because we only have one tax to pay, except the one taxpayer tends to want more, which is the Gov Guam, the Section 30 money. So yeah, you're right on all of that. And the one argument you hear a lot, we can't vote for the president of the United States. And but technically you can. I understand, you know, I know veterans can, I mean, military people can. And then if you register with the State Department, a particular form, I understand.
Not so, Marcus. If you are a resident of Guam, you can't vote for president. It just, no getting around.
You got to be dual resident then.
Well, you'd have to live in one of the states. That's the way our political system's designed. Anyhow, thanks for calling. And
yeah, I think I know what he's saying. If you had if I still lived in Hawaii,
yeah,
I still held residence in Hawaii, but I was just here working or something. I could get a voter's form from Hawaii.
You can vote where you live, and where you live is not necessarily an easy question to answer. But if you don't live in a state, you can't vote.
That's right.
Anyhow, Marcus, give my best to your choir, okay?
Okay. Yeah, they got a new song for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so next I've got Andre. Good afternoon, Andre. Hello, Andre. Hello, Andre.
Yes, that's me. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, I said long time no talk. I just have to say this is the smartest afternoon talk show in the Western Pacific. I tell you that.
Well, thank you very much, Andre. I'm glad that you recognize that.
Yeah. Well, I got a quick question for you. You know, it seems that the biggest issue, I think, with the independentistas, that the way you call them, or the independence people, is the fact that we don't have a seat at the table and we don't have a voice. So statehood's a long shot because of what you said earlier with the, you know, voting representatives, 2 and you know, 1 and then and maybe racism, right? But what about getting our non-delegate vote representative to have the vote? That, I think, would be an even better shot at either independence or statehood. If the issue is we don't have a voice, we don't have a seat at the table, they do what they want, and they treat us like dirt, what would be the obstacles, Bob, I guess, to getting Congress to change the Organic Act from making it a non-voting delegate to a voting delegate? And there we have at least one vote is better than no vote.
A problem with that, Andre, is that Congress doesn't have that power. Congress is regulated by Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution. I'll read the important part. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states. So only states get to choose congressmen. So the U.S. Congress can't say, okay, you guys get to have a voting member of the House of Representatives. It wouldn't work. But I do want to elaborate on that a little bit. And I think there's a really good argument that we do have a seat at the table. And it's an important seat at the table. I'd start out by what Robert Underwood has said publicly. He said, when asked on the talk radio show, it must be tough on you not having a vote there in Congress. And Robert said, no, your ability to accomplish things in Congress depends on the kinds of relationships you can build. If you can build good relationships, you may be able to accomplish things. If you can't, you won't. So not being able to vote is not an insurmountable barrier, Robert said. Second thing I would say is that our representative has everything that every other congressman has, an office in the Longworth building or wherever. And if you walk down the hall, it looks like just like every other congressman's office. A staff, a budget, paid trips home, everything that goes with it. The ability to sit on important committees, to chair important committees like Michael San Nicolas is the vice chair of a very important committee in Congress. And because our representative has membership in these committees, our representative can log roll. In other words, build these relationships and let it be known that I'm looking for support for something that benefits my jurisdiction, and those who support me could perhaps depend on my support in the committee on which I sit when it comes to the appropriate time. So we do have a seat at the table. It's not the biggest chair at the table, but the way the House of Representatives work, Andre, it's based on seniority, and it takes a long, long time in the House of Representatives to work yourself up to those great big chairs. But we do have a seat at the table. Compare our situation with, say, Oceanside. About the same number of people. Oceanside has to share its congressman with everybody else in San Diego County. How do you think that works?
Right.
So that's my short answer, Andre.
Yeah, well, I understand. It's just a little kind of confusing a little bit, because if Congress has the authority to create laws, the Organic Act per se for the people of Guam, then and put what's in it, and, give us limitations and or give us some advantages, then you would think that one of those advantages that they can give as a Congress would be the voting delegate, but I guess not. So, thanks, Bob. Learn something every time I listen to your show.
Yeah, I'm glad you called, Andrew. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. We're coming up here on seventh inning stretch. Yeah. Okay, let's all take a stretch here.
The summer of Jeep, Compass, Cherokee, Wrangler, Cars Plus in Mighty. Your new adventure starts now. Buy the 2019 Motor Trend SUV of the year and get a new Jeep Wrangler Sport for $268 per paycheck. Or get a new Jeep Compass Sport, only $167 per paycheck. Let them hear you coming in the new 2019 Jeep Cherokee. Buy for $205 per paycheck. And get financing as low as 1.99% on all Jeep models. Come see why you'll be kicking it at Cars Plus in Mighty. Driven by you.
Are you a person who does really good work, but you're not very good or very comfortable with letting that fact be known? In other words, self-promotion just isn't for you? I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, we'll have a perspective on this that might change your mind.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Center field bleachers, Wrigley Field, Chicago, 7th inning stretch. Just one of the perks of being part of the international radio listening audience. People really enjoy that 7th inning stretch, the big halftime show that we have every day at 5 in the afternoon. The humility of the host of Tall Tales.
Yes, indeed.
And of course, I just have to mention that I'm pretty proud of my humility, but that's another.
You do it. You do it well. You pull that one off.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. So back to the Davis case. I think Dave Davis did the independentistas, the Guam exit folks, a big favor, because I think he's made it very clear that you're not going to be able to use your government of Guam perch as a means of propagandizing the folks, because this important plebiscite is coming up for which they must be educated. And from almost everything that I've seen, I would have to point out that educate and indoctrinate are not synonyms. And that, to me, is where this education process would more than likely go. But I said I'd start out with the Treaty of Paris, and occasionally I've even had callers here say, the United States had an obligation on the under the Treaty of Paris to give Chamorro self-determination, but it never did. Well, of course, as is often the case, I kind of tilt the deck a little bit because I read the Treaty of Paris. And here's what the Article 9, the last sentence of Article 9 of the Treaty of Paris says. The civil rights and political status of the native inhabitants of the territories hereby ceded to the United States shall be determined by Congress. Okay, so Congress agreed with the Spanish government that, or the United States agreed that Congress would determine political status and civil rights. Well, the political status of Guam was determined in 1950 when Guam became a territory of the United States. It took a long time. It took 52 years, because from the time of the Treaty of Paris until 1950, Guam was at best a possession. It was not a territory. It was perhaps analogous to a ship owned by the United States with maybe 15,000 passengers on it. Sad to say, but that's the way it was at that time. So in 1950, the United States, by the way, it's probably a good thing that Congress didn't determine the political status and civil rights of the inhabitants of Guam in 1898, because that would have been just 2 years after Plessy versus Ferguson, which decided that there can be racial segregation on a separate but equal basis, if you remember that. So that might not have been the best thing for Congress to deal with. It's unfortunate that that was the world in which people who were around at the turn of the last century lived in, but that's the way it was. Now, there's this phenomenon that the left wants to engage in all the time called presentism. So we look at what people did 100 years ago, or what countries did 100 years ago, or what institutions did 100 years ago, and then we judge them by what we think are today's standards. And when they don't measure up, we figure we have to condemn them. And then there's something like corruption of the blood after that. If it were the white man who took away all of the Indians' lands way back at the beginning of the United States, guess who gets the blame for it now? Can you guess, Michael?
Well, I'm guessing they all do.
Yeah. People who are alive now are supposed to feel guilty about what happened to the Native Americans back in the days of the Indian Wars. It's called presentism, and it's one of the tools that the left trusts out with carefree abandon. But anyhow, as far as the Treaty of Paris is concerned, the civil rights and political status of the native inhabitants of the territories hereby ceded to the United States shall be determined by Congress. Congress did it. People of Guam are citizens of the United States, and their political status, the political status of the island is it's an unincorporated territory of the United States. Now, some would read that language that I just read. It has to be a political status that we like. Otherwise, it's a violation of the treaty. Okay, so the United States remained a possession up until 1950 when it became a territory of the United States, governed by the Organic Act. People of Guam who could trace their ancestry back to that Treaty of Paris era became citizens of the United States, and everyone born in Guam since that time is a citizen of the United States. And in that Organic Act, there is a Bill of Rights, and this is 1421B, subsection M, and this is how subsection M reads: no qualification with respect to property, income, political opinion, or any other matter apart from citizenship, civil capacity, and residence shall be imposed upon any voter. Okay, so that was the law at the time that this plebiscite legislation was passed. At the time it was passed, it was clearly violative of that section of the Organic Act that's been on the books since 1950. To further cement it, in 1968, the so-called Mink Amendment was passed, and the Mink Amendment said that the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution, to the extent that it didn't apply to Guam, now applies in the same way that it would in a state. But the government of Guam passed the Chamorro Plebiscite Act anyhow, and as it was written, the word Chamorro was very prominent. And once again, going back to the obligatory use of one of the three C's. If you're going to be a member of the Guam legislature, you need to use the word Chamorro a lot in your floor speeches, your stump speeches, the legislation that you draft. So when that plebiscite legislation was drafted, there was no question whatsoever as to who it attempted to empower as far as voting in this plebiscite on the three statuses that were also part of the legislative workup, which, as far as I'm concerned, was a trick played on us, but I'll let that go for a moment. So it was all Chamorro all the time. And it was only after Rice versus Cayetano passed, which dealt with Hawaii and a Hawaii election, where the Supreme Court said you can't bar people from voting based on race. A month after Rice versus Cayetano passed, legislature, we need to fine-tune our legislation here a little bit, and it's really not about Chamorros at all. It's about native inhabitants. And a native inhabitant is anyone who could trace his ancestry back to 1898. That's nothing to do with Chamorros at all. And the decision in the Davis case doesn't exactly chuckle at this, but it comes pretty close to chuckling, as close to chuckling as you'll find in a decision by a circuit court. It's pretty disingenuous. But before Rice versus Cayetano came down, you have to understand, you got to put yourself in the place of a senator. And if a senator said, I'm going to do something really nice here for the original inhabitants of Guam, the average person would have said, who the heck is that? So in order to do the requisite electoral pandering, when that bill came along, the word Chamorro had to be used. And this would allow a great deal of virtue signaling on behalf of every senator, and nobody voted against it, on behalf of every senator in the legislature at that time. I'm standing up for Chamorros. And, of course, as far as politics is concerned, the worst, even being worse than a racist, is to have people criticize you and say, hey, Itautone Tijanya, Tauto Chamorro, Tijanya, Tauto Tano, Baba na Tauto, na Igwizi Atan Baba, fan? Yeah, that's just really bad if you're a politician. So everybody wanted to be on the right side of that, and of course, they wanted the Chamorros to decide what the fate of Chamorros would be. But then when Rice versus Cayetano came down, it required an immediate 180. And the 180 was made, but it didn't fool the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit said that, yeah, I'm hearing the plaintive strains of Dave Brubeck's Take 5 in the background. Yeah, so I'm going to take a short break here, and then I'm going to come back and wind this up, and I can see that it's going to have to carry over into tomorrow for me to give you the in-depth analysis of Davis versus status quo that you all deserve.
Get a half-gallon of Minute Maid orange juice for only $1.99 when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See stores for details. Circle K. Take it easy. Get a half-gallon of Dairy Gold milk for only $1.99 when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See stores for details. Circle K. Take it easy. Get a $7 meal for only $1.99 when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See stores for details. Circle K. Take it easy.
Weekday shopping just got exciting. Join the Agania Shopping Center's Shop and Win on Weekdays promo. Shop or dine at any ASC store or restaurant on weekdays from now till October 31st. Show your receipt at the ASC booth and win instantly. Every $20 spent gets you an entry form to win big at the monthly draws, including round-trip tickets to Manila, $500 ASC gift certificates, and more. See posters and print ads for more. Special thanks to Sky Zone, Fundamental Writers, Vince Jewelers, and Wendy's.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Call to the Post, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky. That's where the Kentucky Derby is run every year. We go there remotely every day for the home stretch on Tall Tales. So this is the home stretch. It means I got about 8 minutes to wrap up today's educational, exciting, insightful episode of Tall Tales. And it also means in about 8 minutes, probably seems like 8 hours, our benighted producer will get a little slack. He's pitched a doubleheader today. He started out the Ray Gibson show at dark 30 this morning, and here he is hanging around to the tail end of Tall Tales. So
yeah, I get me a midday nap though, so it's okay.
All right.
Yeah, I have to do that.
Yeah, I do too. It comes with age.
Yeah, I'm finding that out.
Yeah. Okay, so I was talking about the Ninth Circuit kind of catching the Guam legislature, and they're quick about face in the face of Rice versus Cayetano, when all of a sudden it wasn't about Chamorro self-determination at all. It was about self-determination for native inhabitants. And it was pitched then as not a racial question, but a political question. And the Ninth Circuit, because it dealt with ancestry, and the Ninth Circuit is a very well-written opinion, a much better opinion than the first Ninth Circuit case written by by Alex Klitzkie, who fell very hard from grace after he did that opinion, perhaps citing karma as an explanation, bad karma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what they say about karma. We can't say it on the radio, but we know what they say about it.
I do. So this was a pretty well-written decision, and the decision said, you know, there are times when statutory schemes can rely on ancestry and not be held to be racial. But there are times when ancestry is really just a proxy for race. And the example that was used was, you know, all of our rules of intestacy go on ancestry. You know, if you die without a will, your property goes to your wife, your children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's ancestral. And perhaps if Thomas Jefferson, if Thomas Jefferson had created a trust during his lifetime for his house, Monticello, and said that the only people who could be trustees would be descendants of Thomas Jefferson, probably passed constitutional muster. But this ancestral inhabitants didn't make it. It was a pretext for race. And I can explain what that means very quickly by using the phrase that everyone and his brother wants to use all the time, grandfather clause. I have prohibited the use of the phrase grandfather clause on tall tales, and I'm working with Facebook for them to ban anybody that uses grandfather clause because it's hate speech, at least as far as Facebook is concerned. But what it means is this. After the Civil War, after the 15th Amendment passed and former slaves were given the right to vote, Southern states in their Democrat legislatures enacted what were called black codes. And black codes were for state laws that were meant to deprive black people of as many rights as possible, even though they were now United States citizens. So when it came to voting, after 1877, after Reconstruction ended, many of the states had literacy tests. So a person who presented himself at the polls would have to take a literacy test in order to be able to vote. Well, you know, it was a crime in many of the states to teach a slave to read and write. So not very many former slaves could read and write. So that had the effect of banning them from voting. However, an awful lot of white folks in those days couldn't read and write either. So the workaround was this. If you were the descendant of someone who voted before the Civil War, you didn't need to take the literacy test.
That's tricky. Yeah, that was tricky.
In other words, if your grandfather could vote, then you don't need to take the literacy test. And that's where the phrase grandfather clause comes from.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, so it's a good phrase to divest from your vocabulary.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, but that's a classic example of something that on its face doesn't appear to be racially discriminatory, but when you scrape the paint and varnish off of it, it is.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And that's exactly what the Ninth Circuit said about the native inhabitants argument. Going through the legislative history of the statute, like I just mentioned, and then pointing out that at the time that the statute was adopted, in 1898, 98 point a fraction of the people on Guam were Chamorros. So if you could trace your ancestry back to someone back there, the chances were 1 in 100 that it wouldn't be a Chamorro, but 99 in 100 that it was. It's obviously a proxy for race, especially when you connect that argument with the legislative history of the statute. So the Ninth Circuit said, no, it's just a proxy for race, and if it's a proxy for race, we'll treat it as racially discriminatory. And when you get into those terms and you turn to the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which was ratified on the 3rd of February, 1870, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So the Ninth Circuit laid that out very clearly, as far as I'm concerned. They laid that argument out very clearly, and they disposed of the original or native inhabitants argument probably forever. So tune in tomorrow. I'm going to pick this up. There's still a lot more to be said about Davis versus the status quo, and we'll pick it up tomorrow, and I'll be looking forward to your calls. And once again, thank you very much, Michael Knight.
My pleasure.
Yeah. See you tomorrow, Michael.
Yes, sir.
The Point is KUSG, Hagatnya 3.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Remembering the victims, I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News.
There will be a day when we start to heal and start to move on with our lives.
The mayor of Gilroy, California, Roland Velasco, at last night's vigil to remember the 3 people gunned down Sunday at the Garlic Festival, 2 children and a 25-year-old man. Police and the FBI still trying to figure out why the 19-year-old gunman opened fire. The FBI is looking into his ideological leanings.
Was he affiliated with anyone or any group? It still has to be ruled out, still has to be determined at this point.
FBI Special Agent in Charge Craig Fair, police fatally shot the 19-year-old Santino Lagan, who also injured 12 people during the shooting. Capital One says it's offering free credit monitoring and identity protection for the 106 million people affected by the hack of its credit card services. And the New York Times reports the alleged hacker, Paige Thompson, is a former Amazon employee. President Trump escalates his feud with Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings.
President Trump renewing his attacks on House Oversight Chairman Elijah Cummings, suggesting money allocated for his West Baltimore district was either stolen or wasted.